Chapter 1. New Orleans, or New Orleans, whatever you prefer. So first of all, just what is jazz? To truly know what jazz is, we need to travel back in time, all the way back to the 1800s in New Orleans. It's a Sunday afternoon, and a man is playing an African beat on the drums, while hundreds of other people are dancing around it, improvising their own rhythms and melodies. Passerbyers aren't sure who is performing and who is not, because the line has become so blurred. You are entranced by the complex syncopations of melodies and rhythms created by the people. It's incredible, it's euphoric, and utterly engrossing. This is jazz. Or at least some of the first recorded instances of it. Particularly, I'm describing the well-known dances that took place in Congo Square, which today is known as Louis Armstrong Park. These dances were a means of preservation of culture for African Americans, as they incorporated West African drum rhythms into the dances. Now, while the rhythmic nature of jazz is absolutely outsourced to Africa, the other sorts of jazz, or the melodies and the harmonies, are drawn from more European influences like Bach or Mozart. Now you may be asking, Alex, isn't jazz cited as the original American music? You're making it just sound like a cross between African and European music. Well, the thing that makes jazz so unique is the improvisation aspect of it. In jazz, performers often come up with their own melodies on the spot to fit it into the structures of the song. This is how messy amalgamations of songs are made, like Giant Steps by John Coltrane are made. Of course, Coltrane didn't write any of this down. In fact, I bet almost none of this was premeditated, and all of it is just stuff he made up on the spot. And that's the beauty of jazz. Anyways, back to New Orleans. Jazz was developed, evolved, and revolved in the city of New Orleans in street/steamboat bands, like the ones you see the crocodile playing in Princess and the Frog, that movie with the crocodile, were a very important part of the city's identity. Now, while jazz was deeply engraved in New Orleans culture, one man helped truly bring jazz out of New Orleans and spread it as a widespread American music and culture. That man is none other than the Louis Armstrong. Armstrong possessed brilliant technique, a sophisticated sense of harmony, dramatic and complex solo design, and a remarkable sense of swing. I mean, just listen to this, it's incredible. This guy absolutely shredded on the trumpet. And there really weren't any other players like Armstrong at the time. Armstrong didn't just play the trumpet, he also sang in scat. And if you don't know what scatting is, it's when you sing syllables rather than words, like this. Anyways, besides technique, Armstrong also revolutionized the jazz scene by being one of the first famous recording jazz artists. Particularly, Louis Armstrong's band called Louis Armstrong and his Hot Five recorded some of the most influential jazz solos in history. And every trumpet player worth themselves would go out and buy that new Hot 5 record when it dropped to hear what Louis was cooking in the 1920s. Chapter 2, Swingin'. Armstrong and his band's immense popularity and influence began to bring jazz out of New Orleans in the 1920s, in which Chicago and New York became major hubs for jazz. This is the era of Harlem Renaissance, The Great Gatsby, and Al Capone, Scarface, commonly known as the Jazz Age. This is when jazz became truly the signature sound of America. Its African-American roots symbolized youth and expressiveness, and it had everyone dancing from their heads down to their toes. This large cultural shift was led primarily by the swing bands that toured the United States. You got your Benny Goodman orchestras, your Duke Ellingtons, and later on your Count Basies. Benny Goodman in particular was significant because he was a very important cultural figure. He was placed in a particularly difficult position, being a white band leader that expressed the culture and music of African Americans. Regardless, he featured many black artists in his live appearances, and he was an advocate for civil rights. Bandleader Lionel Hampton even said Benny Goodman Quartet opened the door for Jackie Robinson to come into Major League Baseball. So, it's safe to say that Goodman was important to society. He was also Kangaroo Jack at the clarinet. Just listen to this. If Benny Goodman was the popular kid on the block, Duke Ellington was labeled as the innovator, constantly pushing jazz and utilizing orchestration or big band. Emerging from Harlem, he was a pivotal figure in the development of structure of the genre, and is responsible for some of the most important jazz standards of all time. Ellington is widely regarded as the king of jazz for good reason. Finally, we got the one, the only, Count Basie Orchestra. which is widely regarded as one of the most technically skilled in history. Let me put it in more widely known terms. If the 40s to 50s Basie Orchestra was a basketball team, they would be the 96 Bulls. You know, Count Basie would be Phil Jackson, Bucky Clayton is MJ, and Lester Young is Scottie Pippen. I mean, just listen to Moten swing. It's so elegant, so good. I mean, the bass is like so far from the drums that there's such a tension between them. The boom, 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 boom. It's so good, so good. Chapter 3, Genres. As fun as the swing age was, jazz was moving in a bit of a different direction following World War II, particularly in the Harlem Underground. A new kid was pulling up on the playground named Charlie Parker, and he had this new fast-tempo swing type jazz called bebop. With dance halls and ballroom in decline, jazz found a new home in nightclubs and concert halls, where the emphasis was on listening rather than dancing, which was controversial for some. Bandleader Cab Calloway literally called bebop Chinese music, whatever that racist crap means. Some of it was pretty fire though. Just listen to this. After people like Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, and Thelonious Monk gave birth to bebop, an eruption of other subgenres began to form in its growth. One of these genres took shape when a talented trumpeter from Illinois orchestrated a 9-piece big band piece that incorporated ensemble characters and gave great movement to the arranger. This new genre was dubbed cool jazz, and that trumpet player was the one and only Miles Davis. Cool jazz quickly became the most popular form of jazz in the 1950s due to Davis's influence, and peaked with the release of the album Kind of Blue, which featured an all-star cast of musicians like the likes of Cannonball Adderley and John Coltrane. That's like, if you don't know jazz, that's like insane. That's like having LeBron and MJ on the same team. It's crazy. Not only was this album considered one of the greatest of all time, but it is also, still to date, the best-selling jazz album of all time, which really speaks a lot to the influence Miles had in the 1950s. I mean, this guy was a full-blown A-list celebrity. He was a shrewd real estate investor, connoisseur of luxury cars, and a perennial on Esquire's list of the best-dressed men in America. Now, these genres aren't the only subgenres to spawn in the 1950s through the 70s, as others include Latin jazz, which draws influence from Latin America, gypsy jazz, which has more European influence, hard bop, which is an extension of bebop, and later on jazz fusion, like acid jazz, that drew influences from modern genres like rock, funk, and disco. While jazz exploded into dozens of subgenres through the 1950s, at this point, it had for the most part exited the mainstream. It was completely gone from mainstream Billboard charts, and jazz artists never truly got the superstar status they achieved in the 1950s. So, with that said, what is jazz today? Is it a dead genre? Is it completely irrelevant in the modern day, and simply a piece of history? Chapter 4, Jazz Today. I think it's safe to say that jazz is more alive today than it has been in years. There are now huge artists like Kendrick Lamar implementing jazz and underground artists like Kamasi Washington into their music, particularly in Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly. We also have new movies like La La Land and Whiplash implementing jazz into their plots, as well as even modern pop artists like Leve, who are doing jazz syncopated with pop. And of course there's all the other jazz fusion stuff that I haven't mentioned. Now that's just a really basic history of jazz, and I didn't even go over like the vocal stuff, you know, the Ella Fitzgeralds, Chet Bakers, you know, the whole pop world either, the pop jazz, you know, Frank Sinatra, all these other people, but anyways, that's about it. See ya.